Today on Ascend, the Great Books podcast, we are discussing part 2 of the Libation Bearers.
The second part of the second part.
Very good. The second part of the second play in the Oresteia. So we're going to discuss some really deep parallels in this text to the Odyssey. We're also going to discuss how Orestes can fulfill the command to avenge his father while also not incurring the curse of his mother. And so we'll look at the tensions that I think Aeschylus bakes into this play, and then prepare ourselves for how he answers these questions in the Eumenides. So join us for a good conversation on the Libation Bearers.
Welcome to Ascend, the Great Books podcast. I'm Adam Minihan here with Deacon Garlick. We have our good friend Thomas Lackey with us. Again, this is the second part of the Libation Bearers. You can go check out the first part last week. And we are going to go finish up this play possibly this week. This may be the second part of the seventh part. I don't know. We'll see how it goes. We had an hour and 40. Here's what happened last week. Last week, they were like, yeah, this will be pretty fast. I don't know. There's not a whole lot there. And an hour and 10 minutes in, we're only on line 200. And we had to get through 670 or something like that. And so I'm like, okay, so we'll finish up the first part at an hour and 45 minutes. And I'm like, guys, next week, we got to get it together. I have things to do in the morning. We cannot be 2 hours into this conversation. And you're like, oh no, we'll be fine. This is going to be easy. So we'll see. I don't know. I have my doubts, but we'll see how it goes. Thomas, great to have you on the podcast. Deacon Garlick, welcome to your own podcast. How did I do that time? The first take that I did, this is the second take that I did of this intro. The first take I did, as I was in the process of doing it, I wasn't even looking at Thomas or Deacon Garlick, and I look up and see them, and they're both laughing at me, so I realized that I must have said something wrong. I guess I got my words tied up and messed up. Great to have you both here.
We're very happy that you're here too, Adam, just so you know.
This is my thing. I do the intro and the outro and maybe throw a little color commentary in there, and this is my role in the podcast. I get it. I understand. So when I mess up, it is pretty funny because
you got it down to perfection.
Get it together
is why. Yeah. And then when, it just makes it that much funnier if something goes off the rails.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you guys knew what you're signing up for having me on the podcast, so.
Did we?
Well, if you didn't, it's not like that I don't have enough videos out there of myself being tongue-tied. It's very easy to go find videos of Adam Minihan saying things silly, so.
Okay, you bring an element of levity to the podcast that I greatly appreciate, that I do not think that I bring naturally. So, all right, so we're going to get into... So Adam says we can't spend 2 hours on the second part of the Libation Bearers, so we probably need to jump into the text. So last week, we covered the first half, roughly speaking, a little bit more than half. Basically, we covered all the way up into when Orestes comes to the house. So that's when we're kicking off this week. So Orestes has come to the house. He is enacting his plan to be the blood avenger, to be the agent of vengeance upon his own mother and her lover Aegisthus for the murder of Orestes' father, Agamemnon. And so we're going to see a tension that we flagged last week play out. Overall, the Libation Bearers, I found it to be a very straightforward text and very much an extension of Agamemnon, the play, both in its narrative and in its themes. I don't think it pulls a lot of 180s, except maybe the end, not a 180, but at the very end, you kind of get okay, so this is where the narrative's going. Because I'll be honest with you, the first time I read the Oresteia, after reading the first two plays, my question was wait, what happens in the third? Because the first two plays track pretty closely. There's a little bit of difference, but pretty closely with what we get from the Homeric texts, particularly the Odyssey. But the third one is very much Aeschylus' own invention, as I understand it. And the third one is Eumenides is the one that actually really made me fall in love with the Oresteia overall. That I think this is what really makes it a great text, and very much serves as that intellectual bridge between Homer and Plato.
I have heard, in reading no Greek, I can't confirm this, but the complexity of the Greek actually tracks that as well, where Agamemnon is a more complicated poetic Greek, and it becomes increasingly straightforward as you go from Agamemnon to Libation Bearers to Eumenides. I can't confirm that, but it's what I read.
It sounds great. That was a great theory. It sounded really good. So as long
Dude,
as
I'm going to start doing that with the podcast. Like, according to the Greek, when I was reading that, it just sounded more poetic. I'm going to pull that card a lot.
It's all
forward.
hearsay, which probably would not be admitted in the Eumenides.
The difference between me and you, Thomas, is I would say that, like, no, this is definitive. Like, this is basically ex cathedra.
We don't have our good friend Dr. Grabowski here who would call us out on our Greek. So, Adam, if you would like to just throw out some random Greek theories of your own, feel free to do so. So I will leave that to you. So again, we're going to anchor
Mucho importante. Yeah, see.
We're going to anchor ourselves back into the text. So as a reminder, right, Orestes' plan here is he's going to show up at the house, and the house of Clytemnestra and Aegisthus, which is really the house of Atreus. And he's going to present as a stranger. And this is his whole plan, is he's going to present as a stranger and get access to the house, and then he's going to seek his vengeance. And so one of the very first things that I noticed here is, one, that Orestes' plan to kill his mother and her lover includes violating guest friendship, to be welcomed as the guest, and then for the guest to kill his host. I mean, at least in the Homeric period, that is a huge violation, I would assume. And secondly, this doesn't play out exactly like Homer would have Xenia or that guest friendship play out. And maybe this is where Orestes finds his justification. Because if you look at the porter, right? So when he goes to the house and the porter answers, 6:37 or so, the porter says, "All right, hear you. Where do you come from, stranger? Who are you?" Well, that's a faux pas in the Homeric system, right? You don't ask who they are. You don't ask their name. Odysseus hung out with King Alcinous, or whatever his name was, for 3 days before they ever asked him what his name was. And so that was one thing. I'm not sure we could parse that out, or how do we unpack that? But I'm trying to figure out where guest friendship plays in Orestes' plans for vengeance.
I want to back up just even one step before that and say Clytemnestra had this elaborately worked out plan for how she was going to revenge herself on Agamemnon. She had to then weave the tapestries and dye them with all the little snails, and then weave the cloak that doesn't actually have a head in it so he gets tangled up in it. She's got this all worked out in fine detail. And Orestes' plan is like, okay, guys, wait for this. I'm going to go up. I'm going to knock on the door. And people are like, then what happened? It's like, I don't know. I haven't gotten that far. But it's going to be great.
It's a very Adam Minihan type of plan. It's like, I don't know. We'll just we'll wing it. Like, we're
going to wing it. Now, he wings it pretty well. I mean, I think that we've kind of got like an Odysseus thing going on when we get to him actually winging it. And he starts weaving all these stories. But his plan thus far, and he actually gives a little bit of his plan. We don't need to back up to it, but he gives a little bit of plan to the chorus and to Electra. And it really doesn't have this part about I'm going to pretend to be someone else. He kind of fills that in as he goes down below. He just says, I'm going to go up and knock on the door and they'll let me in, and then I guess I'll kill him or something. And this is the great plan.
Well, he is a young man, right? I mean, he's a parallel to Telemachus. And I think last time we talked about the fact that in a certain way, I guess, killing his mother is his coming of age story, right? Avenging his father, being the blood avenger, is him taking on the mantle of adulthood.
Well, so I guess there's a staging thing, I guess probably worth mentioning, is that he's probably baning on the Skene, right? The large doors of this building that stands at the back. So there's, again, great use of that prop. You've got probably very large doors. Of course, the whole echoclema would have to be able to be rolled out of it. So there's probably big doors, and he's banging on the doors. But then he says, this is the third time knocking. Who's in there? if this house does welcome strangers. So there's already a sense again that there's something really wrong with the way this household is being run.
Yeah, because he has to knock the 3 times.
And then when the doorman finally says, "All right, I hear you," he goes on and asks them to bring him in. He says, "Have someone with authority come out, the lady in charge, but a man is more seemly." And he's starting to kind of poke at them already.
Doesn't Clytemnestra play off this as well? So she says, like, she opens hers up, "Strangers, please tell me what you would like, and it's yours." But then down towards the end of that, 655, she says, "But if you want higher things, right, the affairs of state, that is of men's concern, and I will spur them on." Typically a statement I wouldn't flag, except the fact that, like, Clytemnestra has played the role of the man, right, throughout the first, throughout Agamemnon. And so I do think I want to throw out a theory here that she will revert to the feminine when it's advantageous for her. So she takes on the mantle of the masculine when she needs to take over the house, etc. But then when it's advantageous to try and be feminine, she reverts back to that.
Yes, I think she plays off her femininity when it suits her. Now, that said, we cannot go on without noting that the first thing she offers him is a hot bath, which in context is just hilarious.
And I think we could probably right here, there's going to be many of these, but I think we also could paint our first strong parallel to the Odyssey. So once again, right, you remember Odysseus comes home and he is under the disguise of a beggar, and he tests then his home before then seeking revenge on the suitors. And we have a strong parallel here to Orestes, which obviously this narrative happens before that, but now that we're reading it with Aeschylus 300 years after Homer, right, there's really strong parallels here how he presents this with what happened with Odysseus.
Well, I think
go ahead.
I would say, yeah, the parallel he presents himself again as the stranger, and I think the idea of the test is important. I think he feels that he feels he's on a commission here, right? So he has this commission from Apollo. But I also think there's a sense in which he's trying to test and feel his mother out.
And you see that mainly in the fact that, because does it really add anything? Like, what's the purpose of the fact that he tells them that Orestes is dead? So Orestes tells his mother that Orestes is dead. That does not seem necessary to the plot to actually kill Clytemnestra and Aegisthus. I find this somewhat comparable to Clytemnestra in the tapestries Agamemnon walked on. Ultimately, they are not necessary, right, for her plan to murder her husband, but there's a reason that she wants to do that. So what is the reason that Orestes tells them that he's dead?
My best reading, at least, I'm going to give 2 related readings. One is that I do think Aeschylus is using this to make a dramatic comparison to the Odyssey. And the more he fleshes out this story, the kind of Odysseus-like weaving of the tale that I'm a stranger from this place and I met this guy on the road and he told me this story, they're very much drawing up the Odysseus parallels. I think there's a dramatic purpose to that. But I think on the other hand, on the more direct, I think Orestes wants to see how his mother is affected by this news, whether as a test or just out of curiosity. I mean, he hasn't seen his mother in a long time.
Yeah, and if, obviously, you got to figure out, like, is she once she finds out this news, is she actually truly sorry for it or like sad about it?
Right? Because like, it's a question.
Because like if she isn't, like, is she really truly sorry, like, that, or like sad about him dying, or does she think that she actually escaped from her doom of like actually being killed at the end? Like, so I don't know. Like, this is when I was reading it, I was like, I'm not sure. Is he trying to just test the waters to see what everybody else is doing? Because like whenever he tells his mom, Clytemnestra, like, is she sad that her son is dead, or she like almost like, oh, I'm actually kind of happy because now I'm not going to die?
I think she's an immensely complicated figure, and my guess is, I mean, you also think about him being sent away. she sent him away, and I think both of these things are true. She sent him away because she was afraid of him, knowing that he would grow up and would have this duty as avenger. I think she also sent him away because she was afraid for him, because he would be in danger from Aegisthus. And I think that kind of tension plays throughout this whole interaction. I think she's glad he's dead, and I think she's sorry he's dead, because she is his mother, and she cares for him. And she is also afraid of him.
But I do very much like the parallels here between what Orestes is doing here and Odysseus as the beggar coming in and testing people, right, and spinning them narratives and seeing where they stand with things. So let's look at the, let's kind of push forward to the next section, which is the nurse. Speaking of another strong Odyssey parallel. So here it shifts to a dialogue between the leader and the chorus, and we're also then introduced to the nurse. And this is Orestes' nurse. So again, we should keep in mind that Odysseus' nurse, Eurycleia, in the Odyssey, was one of the very first people to come to recognize him via his scar. And so now we kind of get, I mean, it just seems that Aeschylus is tracking this very closely and very intentionally. I'm not sure why, because Homer doesn't give this me detail. So it's not like he's borrowing from Homer on the story of Orestes particularly. But Aeschylus very much wants to parallel the story of Odysseus here.
But I think we see her visibly in tears. And Aeschylus is setting up two aspects. One, we already see a contrast between the overpowering emotion that the news of his death has had on the nurse versus the, no matter how you read it, at least the controlled emotion on of his mother. So she may be genuinely sorry, but she's still very much in control. The second is he's setting up, I think, for what we see a bit later, when she appeals as his mother, at that, I'm the one who nursed you and raised you and, held you as a baby. We start to wonder, is that really true? Maybe the one that did most of the nursing and the holding and the comforting at night and all the rest of it was actually Calissa.
But she appeals to that, over and over and over. She beats that with the dead. She beats that, to the nth degree. It was just over and over again. She brings that up.
Oh, I agree, and I think Aeschylus is introducing in the brilliant way that these dramatists can do. He doesn't tell us that's not true. He gives us enough information that we start to wonder if it's not true.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there were two. I like that parallel a lot. There were two things I noticed in the nurse's kind of opening monologue here. One, I really liked this poetic picture that women are prophets of infants. Did you guys see this? This is at line 745 in Fagles, right? That basically the women are how a prophet can interpret the birth signs. So women interpret the needs of the infant, right? So they're the seers of children. I don't know. I thought it was a really interesting poetic snapshot.
I know I missed that entirely.
I don't know. I thought it was kind of a beautiful picture of the femininity in relationship to infants and children. I had never heard that kind of metaphor before. So I very much liked it. I thought it captured my attention. And then around 750, she says, so I nursed Orestes, yes, from his father's arms. I took him once. And now they say he's dead. I've suffered it all. And now I'll fetch that man the ruination of the house, give him the news. He'll relish every word.
She suffered it all. Her son's dead, her husband's dead. Now, mind you, she killed her husband, but she's just suffered it all.
Well, I think he's also saying that Aegisthus is going to be thrilled, right?
Right. But also as a clarification, this is the nurse speaking, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So this is the nurse speaking. It reminded me a little bit of the story of Phoenix in the Odyssey. If you remember, when he's appealing, they go on the emissary to Achilles, and Phoenix helped raise Achilles, and he's trying to say, I did all these things for you, and now I need you to do something for me. Do this. I actually wrote Phoenix in my notes here because I found it to be somewhat of a parallel. The nurse had done all these things for Orestes, And then she needs Orestes to come back and repay her to reorder the home. And he's dead. And now, like, she'll never get that repayment. So I actually found her story in Phoenix's to have a certain parallel.
I think a couple of things also to bring out of the nurse is she doesn't believe Clytemnestra. So we're talking about whether or not we believe them or not. But she's saying that, talking of Clytemnestra, she made a melancholy face to the servants, but she was hiding her inner laughter. Now, I think there's enough there to doubt whether or not the nurse is bitter and reading more into Clytemnestra than is there, right? I mean, maybe I personally actually think Clytemnestra it is conflicted, right? I think she's probably feeling both. But maybe I'm wrong. Maybe the nurse who is spot on here, and Clytemnestra just knows the right words to say. But I think she's just a very interesting character, and I do think Clytemnestra is, at least in this position, that she picked, of all the people in the household, the nurse specifically, to go and talk to the stranger, and to summon Aegisthus so that he can talk to the stranger man to man. I think there's this idea where she's very aware of the gender roles, and she feels like she's gotten as much out of this stranger as she's going to get, but she's not satisfied with the story in some way. I don't know that she thinks it's Orestes. I don't think she does, but I think she wants to know more, and she's like, well, Aegisthus will be able to get it out of. So I guess that her plotting ability, as I think, being put on display here. She's very much in control, and she's thinking everything through. And when she's not satisfied, she works out a plan on the spot to work things around to what she thinks is going to be her advantage, although we know that it's actually not.
I like that. I like that read. I also enjoyed the dialogue between the nurse and the leader. It reminded me of the leader in the Herald, if you remember that from Agamemnon, where you can tell the leader was like trying to tell the Herald something. So here we have the leader trying to tell the nurse something, right? So the nurse at like 766 is like, but how? Orestes, the hope of the house, is gone. The leader, not yet. It's a poor seer who'd say so, right? So he's like, there's this play. Well, actually, I think it's a female, right? They're playing back and forth. And I just enjoyed it. I enjoyed the narrative that they give. If you go on into the chorus, that starts on a little bit like 774, the one thing that I thought was interesting is, if I read this correctly, is that it describes Orestes as an orphan, right? That like somehow he just simply doesn't have a mother anymore. This is at 786. Now the orphan needs you. I took that to be discussing Orestes. And so I thought it was interesting that they simply refer to him as an orphan.
Yeah, the orphan young cult of the man you held dear. That is interesting. I'd missed that.
The other reference that comes into the chorus, which we probably need to parse out, is that we start getting references to Perseus. And so this is at a little bit before 820. Raise up heart of Perseus in your breast, and for all you love under the earth, and all above its rim, now scarf your eyes against the Gorgon's fury. In go for the slaughter now. So it's interesting. I mean, there's a lot of things to parse out here. So Perseus, right, is the kind of like pre-Iliad mythological hero who kills Medusa, which is one of the Gorgons, right? So there's a kind of like the band of heroes that were pre-Iliad, right? You had Perseus, you had Theseus, you had Jason's in there, Heracles is in there, right? These heroes that go off and do these great things. Bellerophon would be in there, right? Riding Pegasus and killing the Chimera would be another one. And so, but Perseus here, I think, is mentioned very explicitly for multiple reasons. So one would be is that Perseus kills a female monster. I think there's a play here. So Perseus kills Medusa, which is a female monster. The other thing too, if I understood this correct, so push back if I'm wrong, but the Furies are also then presented as being very Gorgon-esque. And I think at one point even talks about them having serpents for hair and things like that. So they're also female. So anyway, there's Aeschylus, I think, is bringing in the story of Perseus because it has certain parallel imagery in it.
I think there's also in this course something that, again, hints at some different kind of justice that's being hoped for. Because it around line in mine, 803, when they're invoking Zeus still, asking for it to expiate the blood of those deeds long ago with fresh justice. I wish the old murder breeds no more in the house. There's an idea, I think, where, where even looking back all the way to Atreus, I think, reading in these lines, those old deeds, and I don't think this means the murder of Agamemnon alone. I think this is hearkening back all the way to the curse of Atreus and looking to finally bring this all to an end.
Well, let's push forward to the appearance of Aegisthus. So this is 824. So, he comments on the death of Orestes here, and then talks about, the leader, right, it is almost comedic how it's playing out, because the leader is aware that Orestes is alive and in the house, etc. And so the leader's like, there's nothing like a face-to-face encounter with the source, right? Why don't you go up to the man, right? This is kind of funny. Because I don't take Aegisthus to be a very clever character for Aeschylus. I think we've already talked about this, but Homer, in my opinion, Homer very much emphasizes that it was Aegisthus that killed Agamemnon and basically was the person who, usurped the throne. Aeschylus very much presents Clytemnestra as the mastermind. And so, Aegisthus here tends to, I don't know, I find him just to be kind of a dunce, a little tag-along to a certain degree. And so now he's going to, go and see the source face to face and being played by the leader. So we see in the next section there, the chorus. So we get another chorus. It talks about a son ignites the torch of freedom, wins the throne, the citadel, the father's realms of gold. And then we get a scream inside the palace. And this would have been, Thomas, your points that you've helped us understand. So this would have been, what's it called? The Skene?
The Skene.
So this large shed that basically the actors could go in and change masks and roles and etc. So the scream would have come out of Skene, right? Because the Skene in this play is basically the house of Atreus, right? It's the actual home. And so the scream comes out. And so it's interesting, the leaders back till the work is over, stand back. They'll count us clean of dreadful business. Who is us? Well, hold on. That's not right. Who's they'll? Who's the they? They count us clean of dreadful business. Who is the leader worried about there?
That's a very interesting question.
My best guess there is that it's the Furies. That they understand that they understand that the blood cycle is going to continue, and that Orestes, killing his mother and his his family member Aegisthus is going to be a negative. It's going to continue the blood cycle. And so the way I read that is that it's the Furies, because it's not going to be Aegisthus. It's not going to be Clytemnestra. I don't think it's going to be their house. I don't think it's going to be the men, like the chorus from the first one. They're not going to be sad. Who's going to care? So the only person I could think of is that it's the Furies, that they understand what's happening here is going to invoke the Furies.
I also think, I don't know, there might be subtle differences in translation here that would be important, but there's a line here where the chorus, after the cry, says, "Let us stand aside from the business as it reaches fulfillment, so as to seem innocent of these troubles." So I like the idea that they only want to seem innocent of the trouble, right? Not to be innocent. They just kind of want to let it happen, but somehow it not rebound back to them. There's an interesting.
Yeah, they're very much pro Orestes here, right? It's very clear what they want. The other thing that made me laugh is so if you push forward the narrative a little bit, when Clytemnestra comes out and she says, "What now? Why this shouting up and down the halls?" I just love Greek plays, because clearly if someone's getting murdered, in real life, someone's just gonna scream and be like, they're murdering him, right? But then she gets this really poetic answer of, "The dead are cutting down the quick, I tell you," right? Which is wonderful. It's a wonderful line, right? The dead, Orestes, right? The dead are cutting down the quick. The guy that we thought was dead is here killing everybody. So it's just, I found it to be, it's funny because it's somewhat comedic because it's a riddle in the middle of a panic that no one would actually do. But Clytemnestra actually comments on this. She says, "Oh, a riddle. I do well at riddles. By cunning we die, precisely as we killed." She nails this. I mean, she is an intelligent woman. She immediately knows exactly what's happening. And just like we talked about the eye for the eye, this is basically a Orestes statement earlier that they killed by cunning. And so I will kill them by cunning. I mean, she just picks up on this like that. And then I don't know if they're probably supposed to be juxtaposed, but the next line is also hilarious, right? Hand me the man axe. Someone hurry.
Yeah,
So,
I love this because it reminds me of we need to make our requisite Old Testament references, and this is like the sword that David killed Goliath with that they save in the temple, right? It's not just any old sword; it's the sword that we keep as this trophy of our great victory. And she's kept the axe that she killed Agamemnon with all these years, right? And she's saying, "Bring me, as it were, like." Bring me back my trusty axe that I kill people with. It's a bold move that.
So you took this to be the actual, like, this is a reference.
I did.
See, I didn't read. Not that I read it contrary to that, but I just read it as another gender bend here, right? That she's now playing because we're gonna see her flip flop real fast, right? But right now she's in danger, and her first reaction is to play the masculine. Right.
Oh, no, I totally see this as her getting back her trophy, her trusty axe, and she's gonna, rely on it again.
That's funny.
Hope it sees her through. Which, by the way, David does as well when he flees. He has to go. He doesn't even have a sword with him. He has to go and take it from the temple.
The one thing because Adam said we had to finish this.
But anyway, here, go on.
Adam said we had to finish this podcast quickly, so I'm going to tell you my random theories about King David. So, one thing about King David and his depictions that I wish someone would get correct is that he does use Goliath's sword. Goliath's sword would have been gigantic, and like David would have been running around like a Final Fantasy character in like the Old Testament, like with this gigantic sword,
ridiculous sword.
No one ever shows. Right? Like they always show David and he has like a normal sized sword. It's like, no, he used Goliath's sword as his sword. He has this comically large sword for him that he's like just wielding around, killing Philistines with. And I wish someone would give a better depiction of how this actually looked, because the Bible actually talks about David and like he has like fiery red hair and a red beard with a giant sword. I mean, this man is a very unique looking character in the Old Testament.
Well, and I mean, for anyone that is listening, the only extent to which I was making this analogy was this sense in which you have this kind of this thing that was, in some sense, the symbol of your victory, that you invested in it, something that I mean, obviously, in the case of the sword that David cuts off Goliath's head with, Goliath's sword is originally, but that he claims through this victory, it becomes emblematic of his, of the moment at which he became the David that we think of. Now, properly, maybe that should be invested in his anointing, but in a very practical sense, it's in this victory. And I think there's something to that with at least in my reading of a Clytemnestra that saved the axe all these years, right? Is that she sees this as the symbol of her victory.
That's interesting. I did not unpack all of that in that sense. It says that she killed him with an axe.
It certainly did in my translation. Yeah, in the Agamemnon.
No, the Greek actually does. It's actually a hatchet. It's not actually an axe. But I'll let that slide.
Thank you, Greek scholar. We appreciate that. So, but the funny thing, right, about her grabbing the man axe is that this shifts real quick. So she grabs the axe, and then basically the doors open. Orestes, sword in hand, stands over the body of Aegisthus. And Clytemnestra shifts really quick, because down just a few lines later, at 883 or so, she says, "Wait, my son, no respect for this, my child? The breast that you held, drowsy away the hours, soft gums tugging milk that made you grow." So she has pivoted back to the feminine. So she grabs the man axe. She's going to play the masculine power character. Orestes comes busting through the door with his axe, with Aegisthus dead at his feet. And she immediately reverts back to the feminine.
I think there's one important point we have to also say is that I think her affection for Aegisthus was real, right? She's, alas, my dearest, mighty Aegisthus, right? But I think she sees him dead there, and I think it does shake her.
What is yours read on that line again?
Alas, you are dead, my dearest, mighty Aegisthus. And then Orestes turns to her and says, "You love the man? Then you shall lie in the same tomb."
Yeah,
He goes on,
Fagels translates it, "Gone, my violent one. Aegisthus very dear."
So mighty for mine, violent for yours. Interesting. I mean, I can see how the two could be related. If Dr. Frank were here, he'd probably be like, "That's hubris," and if it turns out to be hubris, that's going to be awesome, by the way.
That's good.
But so Clytemnestra doing this, we have to think of the Iliad, right? Where
well, we think this is what's her name? Hecuba.
Yeah.
Right? Hecuba, however you emphasize it. Right? So this is Hector's mother does this. Right? She pulls out her breast, I believe, when she wants Hector to either stay in the city or re-enter it. I can't remember which narrative it is. But one of the times that she's trying to get him to do something, she makes this exact same appeal.
Yeah, and there's a kind of darker version of this at the end of Oedipus or the King, right? Because when he takes her brooch and it undoes her gown, the brooch that he stabs his eyes out. There's a call back to this apparently Greek idiom of women saying, of mothers making this reference, whether or not they really, drew out their breast, or whether or not it's just sort of like a gesture of some sort. Remember, I nursed you, and sort of. I mean, obviously, we've got male actors here, right? So it has to be not quite literal, but this is a common Greek thing in tragedy for sure. It doesn't seem to fly well here, though.
Another thing, too, we should probably keep in mind here is the viper dream, right, that she had of the snake. This is where we're seeing this start to come to fruition, right? She gave birth to a snake, and the snake comes back and bites her. But Orestes, it's interesting, though, because in this moment, Orestes, I mean, how did you read this? Like, Orestes starts to have doubts. He starts to hesitate, right? Because this is where his friend, finally has to speak. His friend that's been with him the whole time finally has to speak. And he gives interesting advice. This is a little after 885, because Orestes is like, I dread to kill my mother. And he says, what of the future? What of the prophet, God Apollo, the Delphic voice? The last line there is the most dispositive, I think. Make all mankind your enemies, not the gods.
Yeah, I mean, this is an absolutely beautiful line. And I mean, it's the only line Pylades has. But also, I think we have to think, like, staging-wise, remember, normally only 2 speaking actors on the stage. Rarely, just every now and again, you get 3. And we had that with Cassandra, who'd been silent on stage for a long time. And I guess probably technically there are only 2 because Agamemnon just walks off stage at that moment when Cassandra speaks. But the audience is probably seeing her as a non-speaking character. Well, Pylades has been on stage a whole long time at this point and not uttered a word. Again, he's probably just considered like as a silent character. And then all of a sudden he comes out with this one line, and it's absolutely crucial. This is the guy in the symphony that plays the triangle, and he's just like waiting for that one moment.
Right.
He plays the cowbell. Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, Orestes, like, this is just a very human, like, it's one thing to like know, like, okay, this is what I got to do. It's another thing to like, now that the moment has come, do I really have the gumption to do it? Do I really have like the like the thumos or whatever thumos to be able to actually carry this out and fully like what? How did you pronounce his name? Thomas, you said Pallades.
I said Pylades, but I could be wrong.
Anyway, whatever. I don't know what the Greek translation is there. I didn't look that up. So I apologize ahead of time for all of our listeners. But like he kind of like he kind of reinforces it, and then Orestes, you know, like I just really liked his response. It's like, you win me over. Good advice. We're gonna move on. You know, it's like it was to me. It was just that was a very human response. It's like, yep, okay, you're right. Let's go. Let's move on into the breach, so to speak.
Right.
Wait,
It's interesting.
Well, we say he's his one friend. He said this at the beginning. You're my one friend of the earth, in the world, and he's been the friend that has accompanied him on this journey. And you know, in his moment of indecision here, he's like, you know, Pylades, what am I supposed to do? He's like, well, trust in the gods. Basically, they sent you here.
Yeah,
It's
and
kind
I mean,
of
his
beautiful friendship, right? And fraternity.
yeah. I mean, absolutely. I mean, like the friend says, like, make all mankind your enemy, but not the gods. I mean, isn't that like the Christian idea too? Like, what is it to profit the world if you lose your soul? Like, you know, to me, I thought that was really good advice.
But it's interesting too because there's a dilemma, right? Because it's funny though because I mean maybe to push back on this a little bit. I'm not really sure. Like, is that really the advice that he needs right now? Because is it really humanity that he's worried about? Because he says, "Make all mankind your enemy, not the gods." I mean, what he's worried about here is violating filial piety towards his mother. And sure, you could read that as like, "What will men say of you?" Right? Will you be an outcast? But the real problem is not men. The real problem are the immortals. They're the primordial gods of the Furies that are going to come after him. So I found it to be also an interesting line of make all mankind your enemy, not the gods. Because yeah, that's true. That works really well if you say, I don't want to do this. It'll be, seen poorly by men, but yes, but Apollo says do it. Okay, great. But that's actually not the problem. The problem is that the immortals are going to see this as incorrect. And there's going to be a clash between the primordial immortals and the Olympian gods on this. So no, I found it to be. I found it's a wonderful line. It reads very epically, but I as I parsed it out, I had some questions about how it actually played out because he follows it. It's a very quick turnaround for him, but then Clytemnestra picks up on this pretty quick, and she shifts. So she shifts from the whole "I'm going to pull my breast out" maneuver to mother's curse, right? So she flips to the other side, and this is down a little bit before 900, she says, "You have no fear of mother's curse, my son."
Well, also,
Go ahead.
I want to say, well, let's not skip what he says. Is when she says, I want you with me as I grow old. And then he replies, what will you share my house when you are my father's killer? My house.
Mm-hmm.
So I do think there's a question as to when you're talking about guest friendship, whose house is it?
Well, that's a good point. So that would only be a further parallel to, that would be only a further parallel to the Odyssey, right?
Yeah. And then she goes on to say that fate had some responsibility for that. There's an interesting thing there, and it's hard to tell since it's the beginning of the sentence. Is she meaning fate and as a god or fate in a generic sense? But there's an idea there as well where there's a kind of a dissociation of the responsibility for what she's done. This isn't something that she did. Fate just dealt its hand.
Yeah, because she then pivots into the curse. And I think the main tension that I saw in this was a little bit before 910, where she says, "I see murder in your eyes, my child. Mother's murder. You are the murderer, not I," Orestes responds. "And you will kill yourself," which is worthy of contemplation there. And she responds, "Watch out, the hounds of the mother's curse will hunt you down." And he responds, "But how to escape a father's if I fail?" And so I found this to be the most distilled, maybe not the most, but this is a very distilled passage about the actual tension in the Oresteia, right? That he, to escape his father's curse, this is what Apollo told him, right? If you do not avenge the blood of your father, plague and exile upon you. Okay, great. So now he goes to kill his mother, and his mother's like, by the way, if you kill me, the curse will be upon you. And so this is the tension, right? How do I avenge my father without violating filial piety against my mother? And I think, too, maybe to go back to that line, 9:10, I think this is him trying to give an answer to it, right? Because he says what? And you will kill yourself, right? You are the murderer, not I. The first time I read this, I thought this was something literal, like he was going to back her off a cliff or something. I'm not sure what was going to happen. But really isn't what he's saying here is he's making, I guess for lack of a better word, a philosophical argument that like you have killed yourself by your own actions. Right? I'm simply an agent of fate. I'm simply the sword in the hand of the Furies here. You have killed yourself through being a murderer. I'm not the murderer. You're the murderer.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is very much of a philosophical statement, right? That you murdered and you have brought death on yourself as the just punishment for your crime. I mean, I think that's exactly what he's saying, which is a different statement than saying, I'm going to kill you because I'm angry. It's like, no, this is nothing but the reward of the crime that you committed.
And then we get a reference to the snake, right? So she makes a reference back to her dream. It's a little bit before 9:15, right? You are the snake I bore. I gave you life. So then we move into a chorus that mentions King Priam and things of this nature. Does anyone have any comments on that chorus? All right, hearing none, because I think that this is quite interesting. So it says, the doors open, torches light, and Orestes, sword in hand, standing over the bodies of Clytemnestra and Aegisthus, as Clytemnestra stood over the bodies of Agamemnon and Cassandra. So we have a mirroring here at the end that I think in a lot of ways, right, that justice has been served. But I think as a reminder to what Thomas said earlier, which I very much agree with, is, even though he's standing here as they did, I find his actions much more just, mainly because, one, the gods, Apollo has very much pushed him into this to be the blood avenger through the cycle of violence and Lex Talionis, etc., but also that his murders were justified, right? They're both tethered to the wrong that happened that he has to fix. Whereas Cassandra and her murder, I think, was disproportionate and unjustified. So even though they're standing, even though Aeschylus here makes a very clear parallel between the two, I think the way I read this is that if you remember, Cassandra, her last cry out was to remember that she was spirited, to remember who comes to tell them how she died, and that the blood avenger will avenge her as well.
Well, I think the chorus hints at the distinction right above this line. So I guess I do have a comment on it. It says that he expels all defilement from his hearth with cleansing to expel ruin's destruction. So there's a sense in which the very much it's viewed, if we're continuing our Odysseus analogies, to Odysseus's killing of the suitors, and then the sort of ritual cleansing of the house with fire and brimstone.
Mm-hmm. And do I understand this correctly that the bodies of Clytemnestra and Aegisthus are also wrapped in the same robes that entangled Agamemnon? So there's a note here that says, unwinding from the bodies on the bier, the robes that entangled Agamemnon. He displays them as Clytemnestra had displayed them to the chorus on the altar.
So I say again that she kept all these keepsakes, right, of her crime.
Mm-hmm.
She kept the robes. I think there's a mention here of the tapestry as well, but now dyed with blood, right? So in addition to and now, and of course the robes I could be misremembering about the tapestry, but certainly about the robes that he says made the bonds for his poor father.
It's interesting why he says Aegisthus has to die. Did you see this at like 980? So he says of Clytemnestra, right, that I pursued the bloody death with justice, of mother's death. Aegisthus, why mention him? The adulterer dies, an old custom of justice. It's interesting that he presents him there as the vengeance is because he's an adulterer. I mean, Aeschylus really mitigates Aegisthus's role in the death of Agamemnon. It's very almost contrary to what we see in the Homeric text. And then you kind of know something's about to go terribly wrong because the chorus that kicks in right after 1,000, it says, "Oh, the dreadful work, death calls and she is gone. But oh, for you, the survivor, suffering is just about to bloom." Right? The man who acts suffers. And Orestes is that man.
It's an interesting line from the chorus right around just about 1018 in this translation. There's no mortal man who'll pass his life unharmed throughout with no price to pay. It's a little ambiguous as to whom that's referring, but I think the answer is Orestes, right? That Orestes has been put into this kind of bitter trial in which he carries a guilt even for doing what seems to be the right thing.
No, I very much agree, because I think the choruses start giving us little hints that something is wrong, and then I really feel like the rest of the narrative is just simply a spiral downwards. So, like 10:25, he says, "I killed my mother not with a little justice. She was stained with the father's blood. She was cursed by God." And then he's dressed, and being somewhat reminiscent of Cassandra. He's actually dressed like Apollo. Orestes is given the branch of an olive tree and invests him in the robes of Apollo, in the wreath and insignia of the supplicants of Delphi. But then he starts, I mean, when I say go downhill, things start to go downhill because he looks at his sword and he says, "I must escape this blood. It is my own. Must turn towards the hearth, none but his, the prophet God, decreed." Now, early on, we had a conversation about Electra being the blood avenger, and if it wasn't going to be her or Orestes, who would it be? This is where he mentions Menelaus at 1041. "Be my witness to Menelaus when he comes." It's really a short line. That's all he says. But I think if we were talking about who could have been the blood avenger without as many complications, it would have been Menelaus. If he comes, they don't even know if he's alive, I think, at this point.
It's interesting that the first words after the chorus, where it says, sorrow for these unhappy deeds, Orestes' sort of response or is, did she do it or not do it? This robe is my witness. But that's an interesting, after all of this, there's still this question. I think this question that haunts, even trials, which of course we'll get to later in Eumenides, which is that the certainty that we have is never sort of the certainty of a God's eye view. There's always a kind of trepidation in the execution of a sentence. Was he really guilty? And yet we, of course, as this whole play leads to, we can't fail to act simply because we might make some mistake. Even though, obviously, making a mistake brings a terrible judgment of its own.
Well, I think you see some of that tension in the text, right? Because at 10:45, the leader of the chorus speaks back to him and is like, "Listen, you've done well. Like, you've done a good job, right? Don't burden yourself with bad omens and lash yourself with guilt. You set us free, the whole city of Argos, and lop the heads off these two serpents once for all." And I mean, and then this pivots into Orestes screaming in terror, which is, Aeschylus very much likes these juxtapositions, right? He likes the people screaming, particularly as for kind of dramatic effect. And so he says, no, women look like gorgons. shrouded in black, their heads wreathed, swarming serpents. I cannot stay, I must move on. So here come the primordial female, goddesses, the Furies, right? Whose goal or motivation is they hunger for the blood of those who have violated these sacred bonds, right? So he has killed his mother, and so now he's going to be haunted by the mother's curse, right? So he fulfilled his father's oath. So he's not haunted by the father's curse, but now he's haunted by the mother's. It's notable, a few things. One, they're female immortals. They are the more primordial gods, older than the Olympian gods, if you will, is how I take this. And also, the reference to the Gorgons, they're like Gorgons. So remember the Perseus reference earlier. And the leader, notice the leader still doesn't get it, right? Steady, nothing to fear with all you've won. And Orestes responds, no dreams, these torments not to me, they're clear, real, the hounds of the mother's hate. And I think, Thomas, it was you that pointed out, 1056 or so, that he immediately appeals to Apollo, right, as his shield, right? God Apollo, here they come, thick and fast, their eyes dripping hate.
Yeah, I think there's a question here. I mean, he seems to have referred to as well before that he was assured by Apollo that no guilt would be his if he did this. I think there's still some sense, this tension that he's appealing to Apollo, basically keep up your end of the deal, I think is the implication. But I don't think it's quite so clear. He seems to have always had at least some dread, both of the violation of the natural law, to maybe backdate that phraseology somewhat, and its fulfillment in the Furies. I think let me put it, I guess I think the Furies have been haunting his mind all along, and I don't think they come as a complete surprise, just simply as a terror.
Yeah, for those who've been following the podcast, you know that we discussed Hesiod's theogony. In his theogony, quite notably, the Furies are produced when Kronos cuts off his father's genitals, and the blood that's actually received by Gaia, one of the things that it produces are the Furies, right? These immortal women who hunt down and avenge those who violate the most primal understandings of justice. They enforce the code lex talionis, blood for blood. And so, I mean, these are these kind of horrific creatures that are going to now hunger for Orestes' blood until they have it to kind of right the wrong of what he's done.
Yeah, and the sense of this righting of wrong is very much of a almost mechanistic quality, meaning that the Furies don't seem to be interested in who was in the right. They only care that blood was spilled, and therefore blood has to be taken.
But this is the whole problem, though, right? Like, are you an avenger or are you a judge? Well, there's no discernment. There's no judging. It's just simply avenging, right? It's just like, well, blood was spilt, and so therefore blood must be spilt in return. And I mean, this is how he ends the whole thing, right? The Libation Bearers, the chorus kicks in, and they kind of give a summary here, right? It says, first, the children eat the cause of all our pain, the curse. Okay, so that is Thyestes, right? That's what Orestes, no, not Orestes, Atreus did to him, right? So that's like one of the original ones. And next, the kingly man's ordeal, the bath, where the proud commander, the lord of Achaea's armies, lost his life. Okay, so that's Clytemnestra killing Agamemnon. And then the third one, a third like saving Zeus, or should we call him death? Where will it end? Where will it sink to sleep and rest, this murderous fate, this fury? And so I think the way we lead into the Eumenides, the third one is that Aeschylus, like we said, this is a good understanding of justice. An eye for an eye, lex talionis, blood for blood is a good understanding, but it has a big problem. There's not an external standard that it appeals to understand what is actually just, and that there could be situations in which murdering your own mother is actually correct. And so now there is no judgment There's no appeal. It's just simply vengeance. And how does the cycle stop? And this is what we see at the end of the Odyssey. Right? And there, how it stopped is Athena just said, cut it out. We're done. Zeus wants peace and everyone's done. But that's a power move. That's a deus ex machina. And so I think as we lead into the Eumenides, what we're going to have is a much richer conversation about then can justice mature, right? Can we go from good to better and understand how can we have a better understanding of justice?
I think there's a hint here in this last bit where he talks about where will lulling asleep stop the energy of ruin, as my translation puts it. This idea of sleep, I think there's within justice, a true justice, a perfect justice, there has to be some notion that peace is restored, right? The crime is such that a household or community which had been in peace has now been disrupted by violence and crime. And justice isn't finished until the peace has been restored. And yet none of these actions taken to date seem to have restored the peace. And I think that's where we turn to Eumenides for something. Is there a better justice? One that leads to peace instead of vengeance.
Right. No, I agree. I mean, the Eumenides, I think, is a wonderful play. And I'm looking forward to kind of parsing it out. And I think it really then illuminates the first two, because you see more of what Aeschylus was trying to do as he kind of parsed out this arc of justice. All right. Well, any other final comments or questions or anything else before we wrap up the Libation Bearers?
No.
All right. I think we're good, Adam.
All right. Well, hey, Thomas, thanks so much again. Appreciate it. I was going to give you an opportunity to give your handle for X or something like that, but you're not on social media.
No, I hide from such things.
A smart man. Okay. Well, we appreciate you joining us, and we will get into the third play of Aeschylus's Oresteia next week. We'll see you then.